The doors are closing. Train departing. Please hold on.
Welcome to MAX101. Today we'll be talking about the schedules again and some of the weird trips and some things that are not just, oh, I'm on a blue line to Gresham. So I am aware that the Steel Bridge project is currently underway and the bridge is being torn to pieces. Not the bridge itself, but the tracks. And so right now trains are running very weird schedules. But this is not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about that weird schedule. I'm talking about on a normal day, weekday, weekend, whatever. Basically, it's the reason why it's not just all day, every day, oh, here's a yellow line to the Expo Center, or here's a green line to Clackamas, or here's a red line to the airport. There are some weird trips throughout the day, and they're there not just because, ooh, wouldn't this be cool if we ran this train only to Gateway? No, it's not because of that. It's for a very good reason. So let me talk about something that I also talked about on the last one, but it's kind of the reverse. Remember how I said the reason that you can't have 24-hour MAX service is because all the trains need to end up back in the yard at night. Well, let's say it is that time and it's now the early morning on your next day. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And now you're ready to start sending trains out slowly, one by one, to get started on their day. What's the first train that leaves Ruby Junction? It does not go all the way to Hillsborough. In fact, several of the first trains don't go all the way to Hillsborough from Ruby Junction. This is where we're going to start from. Let's only start by talking about Ruby Junction. Firstly, let's go over the blue lines to Gateway Transit Center. So there are some blue lines that leave Ruby Junction that only go as far as Gateway. Then, upon arriving at Gateway, the operator will switch cabs, so they're facing the other way, and the train will leave 5 minutes later as a green line to Clackamas Town Center. And so, there you go. The train leaves and goes out to Clackamas. And that's how many green line trains start their day. The next ones are blue lines to Rose Quarter Transit Center. And then again, once these arrive at Rose Quarter, these turn into yellow lines to the Expo Center. And they take a switch at Rose Quarter that gets them all the way up into the Expo Center. That switch, that set of switches that they take to go up to the Expo Center, those are only used during the early morning. Again, like I've said, Rose Quarter will get its own video soon. I promise. I know I haven't made it yet, but it will be coming soon-ish. The most confusing is the blue lines to City Center that leave Ruby Junction. These leave, and yeah, they go to City Center, but that's a very vague term. Normally, this is kind of a rule of thumb, but it was more so true back in the day. If trains just say City Center, then that generally means that it's going to be ending at the 11th Avenue turnaround in Portland. Or, once it gets to that 11th Avenue turnaround, it will give you a more accurate destination. But these trains don't really do that. They say City Center, but as soon as they cross the river, they become, out of all things, an orange line, and they continue off to Milwaukee. And so that's how those get started. They could technically just all go up to the Expo Center, but that would mean that there would be some trains that upon arriving at Rose Quarter, every single train that needs to end up on the yellow and orange line would just end up going to the Expo Center. And so you'd get an early start of service up at the Expo Center, and then a much later service at the start in Milwaukee. So they have these City Center trips to where after blue lines to Rose Quarter leave Rose Quarter and head up to the Expo Center, then some orange lines will go the other way over the Steel Bridge and continue toward Milwaukee. So you have some going to the Expo Center, some going to Milwaukee, and this just kind of evens it out. It makes it so that both lines kind of get their start early in the day. So these are how those lines get started for the day. Once they're there for the whole day until nighttime, which we'll talk about nighttime operation as well. But yeah, once you're on a yellow line or green line or whatever, you're there for the whole day. At Almonica, it's much simpler, thankfully, because there's not as much that you can access directly from the Almonica yard like that. Many Blue Line trains get their start from both yards. Many start out at Ruby Junction or Almonica. But I would say for trains leaving Almonica, Many of them are blue lines the whole day, from Hillsborough to Gresham, to Hillsborough to Gresham to Hillsborough. It's a very simple, long line. But there are some red lines that begin their day at Elmonica as well, which is weird because red lines don't normally start until the Beaverton Transit Center. Although if you're watching this in 2024, well, hello future people, and also this is outdated news for you, so sorry about that. But the red lines will get their start directly out of Elmonica, and they're in service the whole way to the airport as red lines. So yeah, there are a few red lines that start earlier than the Beaverton Transit Center. But again, they're so early in the morning that I think a lot of people probably don't know that those exist. So at night, this process is reversed. Everything is reversed. So let's go to Ruby Junction again and talk about trains that will be entering the Ruby Junction yard. So firstly, I talked about those green line trains. So at night, instead of blue lines going only to Gateway and then they swap cabs and go down to Clackamas, now it's the other way around. You have some green lines to Gateway. They end at Gateway, the operator switches cabs to the other side so he's facing toward Gresham, and they'll take this train off as a blue line to Ruby Junction, and then it ends for the day. Then for yellow line trains that leave the Expo Center, there are some yellow lines to Interstate Rose Quarter. And then once you arrive at Interstate Rose Quarter, they again takes a switch only used at night for yellow lines going back. This switch at Interstate Rose Quarter allows yellow line trains to get back onto the blue line. And from there, they're a blue line to Ruby Junction, so they end in the yard as I hit my door. That is how many yellow line trains end up in the yard. And then also some orange lines from Milwaukee, instead of going all the way to the Expo Center, they will end at PSU. And then at PSU, this is weird, at PSU they'll become a green line train, which is strange, a green line to Gateway. And then once it goes over to the east side, it will then become a blue line to Ruby Junction, again, ending there. Strangely, there are some green lines that leave Clackamas Town Center that are not green lines to Gateway, but are instead green lines to Rose Quarter Transit Center. But it doesn't do what you'd think. It doesn't just turn the other way and then go off to Ruby Junction. No, it turns into a red line to the airport. So it starts as a green line from Clackamas to Rose Quarter. Then it's a red line from Rose Quarter to the airport. Then, from there, it's a red line to Gateway, and then at Gateway, the operator switches cabs, just like at Rose Quarter, and heads off to Ruby Junction as a blue line. It's crazy, but the reason is so that there are later trips to the airport, because people who have known TriMet and their schedules forever will know the time 11:49 p.m. 11:49 p.m. for the longest time was the last train to leave the airport every day. And so, yeah, this just creates later trains because there are green lines leaving Clackamas Town Center much later than that time. So they go up to Rose Quarter and they become a red line. And now, to this day, we have airport service that goes clear up until 1 a.m. And now for trains heading back into Elmonica. Again, it's much simpler, a lot less trains. Leaving the Hatfield MAX station in Hillsborough, the last few trips out of the day only go as far as Elmonica, so they are blue lines to Elmonica. Very simple. They literally just end their day at Elmonica, they clear the train and pull into the yard. It's very direct. The last few red line trains of the night, the ones that don't go off to Ruby Junction, but many of the late night red lines will do kind of their normal thing, but as soon as they arrive at the Gateway Transit Center, they switch to blue lines to Willow Creek Transit Center. And they go all the way through. So it continues a little bit beyond the Beaverton Transit Center and before going into the yard. So it goes all the way to Willow Creek. Willow Creek is one stop after the yard, so they give you an extra stop. The reason they did this is because Willow Creek is a much better place to turn trains around. than many other stations on the system because Willow Creek was originally designed as a terminus. And so red lines will park here late at night, the operator will switch cabs, and it's out of service by this point. As soon as it enters Willow Creek, it's out of service, everybody must get off the train. Then they take this out of service train one stop to Monica, and then they pull it into the yard. Now before I completely go, I want to talk to you about this one trip. It happens on a normal weekday schedule, a normal weekday outside of COVID. It's strange. I've done it a couple of times. It's a blue line to city center, but it's not like what I was talking about at the beginning where it leaves Ruby Junction and then goes into downtown Portland and then eventually goes into Milwaukee. No, this one leaves Hillsboro and it just says city center on the sign. It's a blue line to city center. Now, it's fine, you're just riding on the blue line all the way through, and then as soon as you hit city center, which is the area after the 11th Avenue turnaround, guess what it turns into? A blue line, a red line, wrong again, a yellow line to Interstate Rose Quarter. It turns into a yellow line. It's strange. And yes, the final stop is Interstate Rose Quarter. Now, why is it yellow in color? Well, again, Interstate Rose Quarter is only served by yellow line trains. So that's probably why they did it. And way back in the day, from the years of 2004 to 2009 only, the yellow line was, in fact, using that route to go from City Center all the way up to really the Expo Center, but these trains are going as far as Interstate Rose Quarter. So if you want to get all nostalgic on yourself and ride a train that hasn't really, I mean, they haven't run yellow line trains normally through this part in 11 years now. So if you want to actually have your chance at riding a yellow line all the way up in through that area, that's your chance. Go on a weekday. You gotta be really early. There's only one. It's just one train. It leaves at about 7:10 a.m. It leaves Hillsboro at about 7:10 a.m. It arrives in Portland close to about 8, and it serves Pioneer Square at about 8:05 a.m. if you want to see it. So, yeah, you gotta be out kind of early. But I've done it before. I have video proof of it, and it's a bit weird. So what does it do once it gets to Interstate Rose Quarter? Seems like an awfully random destination, doesn't it? Well, it goes out of service and goes into the Broadway siding. This is one of 2 siding tracks that are used on the MAX system. It parks in the Broadway siding where the operator will switch cabs. So again, as soon as it hits Interstate Rose Quarter, it's out of service and they must clear the entire train. Then it pulls into the Broadway siding, the operator switches cabs, and then the train goes all the way back in service as a blue line to Monica, and it ends in the yard. So, yeah, it's a little weird. I'm not really sure why they made it go all crazy. They could have just easily ended it at, like, Rose Quarter or something. I'm not really sure. It's very strange what they did. But, yeah, and this trip has been a thing for a long time. If you're ever looking at TriMet schedules and you see a train that leaves Hatfield, again, it's about 7:10, 7:12 a.m., and if you follow it, you'll notice that on the schedule, it lists as far as Pioneer Square, but it doesn't list a time at Rose Quarter because it doesn't serve Rose Quarter. It serves Interstate Rose Quarter on the yellow. And so that's the trip right there. I talked about that way too long. Well, I will see you on the next episode. Most abrupt ending ever.